Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So in the midst of plans to turn Ramsgate into a new ferry hub to ease the pressure on Dover after Brexit, the dredgers are still in action. But will it even be ready by the end of March? This programme has also learned that the company handed a £14 million contract to supply extra ferries, hasn't yet announced a single vessel secured for the port. Here's Ed Hauke.
82 days until Brexit, and they're dredging the harbour at Ramsgate. And we're dredging the background of seaborne freight, offered £13.8 million by the Department for Transport to ferry supplies to Britain in the urgent event of a no-deal Brexit.
Well, I make no apologies for supporting a start-up British company.
We've now learned that this start-up British business will have a big role to play in security at the Belgian port of Ostend. We've seen a memo from the outgoing port chairman. It says the security of the site is in the hands of seaborne freight, which has to conclude a contract with a security firm for this. It says there'll be 2 checks with sniffer dogs and CCTV and double fencing, just like in Calais. But none of this is cheap. And will a start-up really be able to handle it all?
Down in Ramsgate, they're worried. Kent's seen a rise in unauthorised channel crossings in recent weeks.
It's very, very concerning that a startup company should be responsible for this without giving evidence that they can actually execute the level and quality of security that's necessary. A migration of immigrants from Calais to Ostend is perfectly feasible, and since they're pretty desperate to get across, they'll follow the weakest link.
Tonight, Seaborne Freight told us.
A security plan for Ostend will be in place for the commencement of operations.
What about the ships? Freighters are conspicuous by their absence in Ramsgate. They're only required if there's a hard Brexit, but Seaborne haven't got any yet. But we've been on the trail of their negotiations. Possible plans to acquire several vessels from the Italian shipping firm Moby came to nothing last year. And plans to get this ferry, the Al-Andalus Express, also ran aground.
That is on charter in the Canaries until the end, till January 2020. You can buy tickets on it. Seaborne Freight are entirely incredible as a ferry company. They have no ferries and have been talking about ships they do not own, do not charter for a year and a half, and it's about time that stopped.
We now understand Seaborne is negotiating over this ship called Lorry, 29 years old and refitted last year with space for just 40 trucks. Bear in mind, freight ships in Dover can carry 180. And then there's this. On Friday, we revealed the April 2018 investor document pitched by Seaborne. Here's section 5, progress to date. It says detailed port agreements for Ramsgate and Ostend, negotiated and agreed. But the contracts aren't signed even now, and when Seaborne issued the briefing, there was uncertainty with the firm past due diligence in Ramsgate. Was that investor briefing misleading at the time? Well, here are the comments made by Bob Bayford, who, although he leads the local authority, was speaking privately and not on behalf of the council in April.
Seaborne as a company wouldn't pass any due diligence because there's nothing there, is there? There's nothing to do due diligence on. So then you have to say, what do we have to look into here to ensure that we as an authority are dealing with an organisation with some substance?
Seaborne Freights points out that it has now satisfied the due diligence of all parties connected to its business, and agreed contracts are now awaiting final signature. Tonight, the Department for Transport says it won't spend a penny on its Brexit contingency with Seaborne Freight until the firm demonstrates an effective service. The clock is ticking until Britain may need it.
Ed Hauke reporting. Now, Theresa May says that Britain will be in uncharted territory if Parliament rejects her Brexit deal. Speaking a day before MPs return to Westminster after the Christmas break, the Prime Minister said that they would definitely vote on the withdrawal agreement next week, even though there's little sign that she's won over her sceptics, while the Democratic Unionists today described it as toxic. Mrs May insisted it was a good deal for the country.
We've got people who are promoting a second referendum in order to stop Brexit, and we've got people who want to see their perfect Brexit. And I would say, don't let the search for the perfect become the enemy of the good? Because the danger there is actually we end up with no Brexit at all. I believe it's in our national interest to leave the European Union, to deliver on the referendum, but to do it in an orderly way, to do it in a way that gives certainty to citizens, EU citizens here, UK citizens living in Europe, that gives certainty to businesses. I think that's important. That's what this deal does. Delivers on the referendum, protects jobs and security, gives certainty to businesses and people.
MPs have come back from their Christmas break ahead of the debate on Theresa May's controversial Brexit deal, which starts on Wednesday. The vote is expected next Tuesday. Mrs May says she's working on getting further assurances from the EU so she can persuade the many doubters and win next week's vote. But the EU insists there'll be no renegotiation. While Theresa May has been in Liverpool today, MPs at Westminster have been discussing a number of different plans for a new solution to the current impasse. Here's our political editor, Laura Koonsberg.
Nothing's getting any easier for the Prime Minister. Her welcoming committee in Liverpool.
I think it's disgraceful that parties put before country. Absolutely disgraceful.
I'm appalled by it, yes, and because I think we are European and we should stay in Europe.
Parliament can't agree. I think the only thing is to put it back to the people.
She swept in with promises about the NHS. Paid for, in part, she claims, by what's her bigger problem, her Brexit deal.
This commitment is possible because of our strong public finances and because as we leave the EU and take back control of our money, we will no longer be sending vast annual sums to Brussels.
Number crunchers and plenty on her own side question that.
Before Christmas, you realised your plan did not have the support to get through Parliament. What evidence can you give us today that anything has really changed?
Yes, we did delay the vote before Christmas, and we're continuing to work on further assurances, on further undertakings from the European Union in relation to the concern that's been expressed by parliamentarians.
Yes. But Theresa May's bedside manner is not convincing dozens of MPs on her own side and among her Northern Irish allies. They won't back her plan without big changes before next week's vote.
Nobody can detect anything new that's coming out now. If she's planning on pulling a rabbit out of the hat, the Prime Minister, good luck to her. Just let's hope it's not a dead rabbit and that it's actually a live and kicking rabbit and it means something.
Jeremy Corbyn objects to the deal and to Theresa May's no-show when she was called to the Commons.
The Prime Minister should be here updating MPs on what progress she has achieved, if any. Instead, she's continuing her approach as before Christmas of ducking scrutiny and dodging accountability. We will hold this government to account for their incompetence.
Back at work now, some MPs are pushing to prevent no deal. Some want a tighter, some want a closer arrangement with the European Union after Brexit. Some pushing for another referendum. But they're so divided, one minister admits our March departure date might be delayed. While around the country, we only watch on.
It may be 2019, but Theresa May is still tangled in the boundaries and barriers of the referendum, when people and politicians were divided into two camps, jutting up against each other. In the Walton constituency here in Liverpool, voters wanted to leave the European Union. But just over the road in Liverpool Wavertree, the decision was to stay. And the Prime Minister is having to deal with that clash of arguments, trying to get a compromise in the middle. But politicians on all sides are so dug in, there's little sign that enough of them are willing to meet her there.
Number 10 wants fine words from the EU to make this journey smoother. But a majority, let alone unity, feels very far away. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Liverpool.
Highways officials in Kent say road traffic tests prepared for the possibility of leaving the EU without a deal have been effective, despite only 89 lorries taking part. The Department for Transport had hoped that 150 lorries would be involved in the exercise, using Manston Airfield as an emergency car park. Thousands of lorries visit Channel Ports every day, and haulage groups have dismissed the exercise as window dressing. Tom Burridge has more.
More than 80 trucks parked on a runway. A government-led no-deal Brexit drill in case we exit the European Union in just 12 weeks without a deal. Manston Airfield, just 16 miles north of Britain's biggest port, will become a holding area for trucks if there are suddenly new checks on goods and long queues at the border.
They're now dispatching the lorries in a controlled fashion, trying to work out how the roads en route to Dover will cope.
The hauliers taking part set off early. Some believe no deal really is on the cards.
On March the 29th, I think it's going to be a bit of a fiasco. There won't be much getting out of the country and a lot coming in. I think the motorways will be absolute chaos.
Learning how to mitigate chaos on Kent's roads in the approach towards Dover was the aim of today's exercise. But it was small scale. More than 80 lorries involved when 10,000 pass through the port each day.
It's good to have a contingency and it's good to pressure test it, but today was done with far too few vehicles and it was done too close to Brexit. This should have been done a year ago.
But today at least, the roads were clear.
On the face of it, today's exercise has gone pretty smoothly. But how much has the government really learnt from ushering 80 lorries down a few roads? This is also about the government sending a warning. It's the Prime Minister's deal, or no deal, is a real option.
The government calls its no-deal traffic plans Operation Brock. Budget £35 million. And it's working closely and running today's drill with the local council.
Do you accept, though, that this can't replicate a no-deal scenario?
Of course we can't replicate it because that would cause, well, we don't know what the scenario will be, but what we need to know is just actually to make sure we've got a flow and what impact it would have on the local network.
Are you worried about no-deal? Possibility?
As a resident of Kent, I'm worried, yes.
The government says it has to plan for all eventualities. If the roads do not flow into Dover, it will have a drastic impact on our economy and everyday life for those who live nearby. Tom Burridge, BBC News in Kent.
Here, an exercise to test the possible disruption caused by a no-deal Brexit was branded too little, too late today. A convoy of lorries took part in the rehearsal of an emergency traffic system in Kent. Hauliers, though, said it should have all been done months ago. It came as MPs returned to Westminster after their Christmas break, with growing cross-party demands to block a no deal. Here's our political correspondent, Carl Dinnan.
Empty lorries on an empty airfield. Is this what no deal looks like? The government tried to get 150 drivers and trucks to practice traffic jams near Dover. They managed 88, plus a bin lorry, but said the trial had worked. Travelling back to Westminster today, MPs who support Brexit insist no deal and World Trade Organization rules would be mostly fine.
I don't think we should be afraid if we have to, walk away on a WTO framework, because many of our businesses are doing that trading framework already, and it's not the end of the world. It's just a little bit more clunky in the very short term whilst those new systems get into play.
In a week or so, MPs should vote on the Prime Minister's deal here. But Labour say they still don't know what's changed since the vote was pulled in December.
There seems to be confusion over exactly what the Prime Minister is demanding from the EU.
Mr. Speaker, when the debate begins on Wednesday, the government will be clear with the House what has been achieved since the vote was deferred last year.
But if that turns out to be inadequate, more MPs and even this recently resigned minister think another referendum might be needed.
So if there is deadlock in Parliament, which there is, then it may be that the best way forward is to get the people back into the process via a fresh referendum with a new set of questions.
But isn't that betraying the democratic mandate of the first referendum when people said, if you vote for Brexit, it'll be delivered?
Well, we've got a deal. People, if you have a fresh referendum, people can still do that.
Around Parliament, there is a lot of noise.
With a small majority. Why are you doing that, Anna?
Far-right protesters in particular crowding and barracking Remainer MPs like Anna Soubry. But amidst all this, a new threat to the government's power has quietly emerged. The Labour Party indicated it would join Tory rebels in voting for a measure that would force the government to consult Parliament before allowing a no-deal Brexit. The Prime Minister, of course, is still trying to avoid a no-deal Brexit, and this evening has been meeting Tory and DUP MPs to try and get them to support her deal. And she does have a plan. She wants an assurance from the EU that the future relationship between us and the EU would begin in 2021. That would mean the backstop that so many of these MPs hate because it's open-ended would have a definite end date in 2021. There's just one problem. She still doesn't seem to have that assurance from the European Union.
OK, Carl Dinnan at Downing Street, thank you.
Well, good evening from Ramsgate. And as lorries took to the tarmac of Manston Airport just up the road in a test of plans for a no-deal EU departure, the Brexit Secretary confirmed to MPs back in Westminster that a meaningful vote on the Prime Minister's Brexit deal will take place next week. But there's little sign that Conservative MPs have returned from their Christmas break any more willing to vote for it. More than 200 MPs have written to the Prime Minister asking her to rule out a no deal in the expectation her proposal won't make it through the Commons. Mrs May says she's seeking further reassurances from the EU and is holding a drinks reception in a bid to woo her rebellious backbenchers tonight. Here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
Manston Airport was trialled today as a lorry park to see how traffic could be managed in the event of no deal. 88 lorries and one refuse collection truck did 2 trial runs to Dover and back. Some hauliers said it was a waste of time. In the Commons, the Labour leader said much the same.
The government is fooling nobody. These shambolic preparations are too little too late. The reality is, Mr Speaker, there is no majority in this House to support no deal.
In recent days, they've started dredging Ramsgate Harbour so it can take ferries and large cargo ships if Dover is clogged up with a backlog of shipping. It's all prompted a cross-party letter to Theresa May from some 200 MPs demanding she rules out no deal.
Jack and I are neighbouring constituencies in the West Midlands, and we've been meeting together once a week as a group because of our concern about the job losses in the manufacturing sector that are already affecting our constituencies. And just before Christmas, we decided that we needed to give expression to the unified view that we have that we can't afford to crash out of the EU without a deal.
Hilary Benn is part of another cross-party push to stop no deal. Along with other MPs, he's putting down amendments, hoping to stop the government implementing no-deal provisions without parliamentary backing.
Could I urge the government to take at least one decision in the national interest now, which is to rule out the disaster that a no-deal Brexit would be for its country?
The core point with ruling out no deal is that the House has to be for something rather than simply to agree what it is against.
Theresa May, launching the 10-year NHS strategy in Liverpool, said she was still hoping new assurances from the EU might help her to get backing for her alternative to no deal.
We're continuing to work on further assurances, on further undertakings from the European Union in relation to the concern that's been expressed by parliamentarians.
Number 10 aides had hoped Tory MPs getting away from Westminster for Christmas might grind down hostility to her deal.
I think that may have been what they were hoping, but I don't see any sign of that from myself or from my colleagues. Talking to people in the constituency, talking to my colleagues of a similar view, I think, as the phrase goes, nothing has changed.
Nothing has changed. Why do I say that? Firstly, because the Prime Minister has brought back nothing of any substance from Brussels. We were led to believe before Christmas she might. It looks as if she hasn't. That's the first thing. Secondly, the DUP, the government were really trying hard to get on board. Nigel Dodds, their Westminster leader, made crystal clear at the weekend they're still not going to support the deal.
The Prime Minister's hoping that the EU might yet provide some assurances that help MPs change to her side.
The unknown at this stage is how many people that persuades. If there's something which the DUP feel that they can live with, I think that makes a significant difference. I think if one or two prominent Brexiteers, even reluctantly, come on board and say, actually, you know, it's not what I would have liked, it's full of flaws, but nonetheless we need to get this sort of stricken aeroplane properly landed now, then I think the dominoes will start to fall.
If the Prime Minister came up with something that the DUP found acceptable, and their MPs came in behind the Prime Minister's deal, that would have quite an influence on you, wouldn't it?
That would have quite an influence on me and other colleagues, and we'd need to look at that and discuss that very seriously.
No wonder she's working on them so hard.
No wonder, but she does need to actually listen to them, and they have very clear views. They've been very clear about it. So far, she's not been able to reassure them or people like me.
Tonight, one of 2 drinks receptions to which all Tory MPs and DUP MPs and their partners have been invited. A bonding exercise to remind them They're all meant to be on the same side, though you might never have guessed it. So, has anything really changed? You can certainly say there's a new level of activity amongst those people, cross-party efforts to try and stop no deal, and you feel that amongst those MPs engaged in those sorts of projects, they think that Brexit at the moment is a kind of runaway train. There has been a law passed that says we leave on the 29th of March, and they think that train will career to its destination, deal or no deal, and they want to stop that. They're trying to find all sorts of things they can throw onto the track to stop that happening. Some of them just want to stop Brexit, but an awful lot of them just want to stop no deal. And it's not clear yet whether they've found heavy enough gear, as it were, to throw on the tracks to stop that happening. The Prime Minister as well, that's something that's changed. She's now talking fairly openly about the assurances and clarifications that she's trying to get from the EU, and it's emerging that she's hoping there could be a document, a letter, something with legal weight to it, in which the EU says Britain will leave the backstop by a certain date and move into a new relationship by that date, say at the end of 2021. Would that be enough to change opinion? You have to say, talking to MPs, the signs are not there. If the ice plates are creaking under the surface, they are doing it very, very quietly and imperceptibly at the moment. One Tory MP I spoke to today, I was asking him if anything had changed, and he said, well, I have to say, when I look back a few weeks just before we went away for Christmas, it was a lot more acrimonious than it is now. Well, they've been sharing a building for about half a day, and they're meant to be in the same party, so I'm not sure that's a very good omen.
It's New Year, good cheer for you. Thank you, Gary. So the government is still determined to get its version of Brexit through the Commons. But at the same time, ministers say they've got to prepare for all eventualities. As part of that today, the government had a trial run of what it calls Operation Brock. It's planned to avoid lorry chaos in Kent if there is no deal. But the test was branded a pointless farce after fewer than 100 trucks took part. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, has been with the lorry drivers today.
Trucks at dawn. This a planned tailback as the lorries roll into this disused airfield for Britain's first major no-deal dress rehearsal. 150 trucks were due to turn up. In the end, just over half that did. But some 4,000 may find themselves holed up here as a crisis measure to ease congestion in the event of a no deal. Shortly before 8 a.m, drivers huddled together for a Brexit briefing before making the 20-mile dry run from Manston in North Kent down to Dover. With the rest of its fleet crisscrossing the channel, local haulage firm Minters sent its removal vans to take part in the Brexit convoy.
Once you've got them marshalled, then you can control it.
But isn't that the whole point about no deal? You can't marshal real life.
No, but hopefully it won't be for too long.
Why?
Well, there's going to be chaos. There's going to be an element of chaos, but because we don't know the amount of trade.
And that matters when some of your business, like his, is critical refrigerated medicines on their way to the continent.
If we've got to do customs and we have pharmaceuticals just in time, temperature controlled, then you're going from, you know, potentially a 2-hour wait for customs documentation to possibly, I don't know, 2 days.
To avoid that potential gridlock, the government simulation, codenamed Operation Brock, saw batches of 25 trucks staggered at a time, wending their way through the smaller back roads towards the port. We're just a few miles outside Dover, where they've been stacking up what lorries they have managed to get for the trial today ahead of their approach down into Dover. Fair enough to say the traffic has been light and the operation has run smoothly. But remember, this is just 83 trucks out of what many say would be thousands that would be backed up in the event of a real no deal. And the operation, of course, has been highly organised and managed. And this crucial fact, not a single one of these lorries will actually enter the port in Dover for customs checks, where many say the real problems are expected. In the end, 89 trucks made it down to Dover and down to reality, while the lorries today conveniently turned tail for the run back to Manston. Under a no deal, all of them instead would need to clear customs before leaving the UK.
The controlling of vehicles is the easy part. It's actually getting the paper process of customs. That's critical.
And that, I can tell, is the bit that's worrying you.
Oh, yeah.
And customs sources we spoke to today agreed, one saying he simply didn't see how today's operations could in any way be described as a success because they weren't a true reflection of what would happen here at Dover on day one of a no deal. An opportunity, he said, to show not just how to keep freight moving, but also how they would be processed by customs agents here, once again overlooked. Criticisms over customs, but also over today's choice of location from Kent MPs.
Well, I think the whole idea of using Manston Airport as a routing on the way to the port of Dover is not a great idea. It's an airport which is out of the way, so it's hard to explain where it is to lorry drivers, many of whom are from overseas and don't speak English terribly well.
Was there any point to today? The government will obviously claim it's been a success. There was little traffic. It seemed to run pretty smoothly.
Well, with 89 lorries, it's hard for it to be a failure.
By midday, it was all over. Each driver £550 the richer. They've done their job, but has this no-deal Brexit rehearsal done the same?
Well, Siobhan joins me now from Ramsgate Harbour. I mean, some Conservative MPs have called this whole thing a farce. One Tory peer said it made him want to weep. What has the reaction been generally? Has it been useful?
Well, Cathy, the consensus here seems to be that it was better late than never, but the drivers really do think it was too little too late. The government will say this has been a success. They've learned something about the traffic flows, the pinch points, but the drivers frankly say, I could have told you that yesterday without the need for this elaborate exercise. The question here is one of scale. They managed to muster 89 of the 150 trucks we expected. But can you really scale that up to the 4,000 that could be holed up at Manston? Would it all run as smoothly? We simply don't know. What we got today, Cathy, was a real sense of frustration from the drivers. They were happy that something was being done to address their issues, but they say that the exercise was really addressing the symptoms of the problem, not the cause. The cause being the thousands of extra customs checks that will be needed at Dover, for which the government doesn't seem to have any plan, Cathy, for any type of dress rehearsal.
Well, we've been talking about the roads. You've been on the roads today. We're here at the port, which forms another part in the whole emergency scenario, doesn't it? But the operation to dredge this, I mean, that's been ongoing today. You've seen the dredger out. But the whole business of hiring this ferry company to ferry supplies in an emergency, that's been mired in choppy waters again, hasn't it?
It has. Well, ever since Seabourn Freight got announced that it had the contract, it has been in choppy waters. They continue today. It plans to run the service from over there 4 or 5 hours over to Ostend in Belgium. Well, today the mayor of Ostend had a press conference and he had this to say, I quote him here, that starting a service in March between the two ports is simply, he said, impossible. There is no agreement with Ramsgate or Ostend. Speaking of Seabourn Freight, he was there. There's no bank guarantee and, as we know already, Cathy, no ships. He wants certainty, he says. He wants clarity. Interestingly, the government's still standing by Seabourn Freight and is confident that they will deliver that service. I'm not sure too many other people are.
I know you'll keep on that story. Thanks very much, Siobhan. Welcome back to Ramsgate in Kent, where today preparations for possible border delays in the event of a no-deal Brexit took the form of truckers practising using an airport as a giant car park. Well, joining me now are Ramsgate Councillor Peter Campbell, local community representative John Davis and Kent Highways Manager Toby Howe. Toby, let's start with you. I mean, was today's exercise any more than a rather pointless waste of money and time?
It was far more than that. It was planned really to look at how we could get freight to leave Manston, join the traffic and actually travel down to a holding point before it actually gets down to Dover. So
you only had 89 taking part.
Yeah, I mean, the number really isn't the issue here. It's really to actually get a quantity at any one go, because should Manston be used for many, many vehicles, we will only be releasing so many at a time. So we might release 25 at a time, 50 at a time. So what we were looking at today was the impact that that would have on the road network, how quickly they can release from the port, from the airport even, all the way down to the port. So that was the critical, what we were looking at.
And it was a great success.
It was a success, really, yes.
Peter Campbell, success, prudent planning, just what you'd expect a government to be doing.
Well, it's not how I put it, I'll be honest with you. I think it's just too little too late. 89 lorries going backwards and forwards when Dover actually has a turnaround of about 10,000 lorries a day. Where the customs are going to be? Well, I mean, it's just a disaster. Nothing's been done. 2 years to negotiate a deal. There's no deal. Is a deal going to be done or not? Are we going to be in Brexit, out of Brexit? What's going to happen? Nobody knows.
Well, Toby, how you know, because you're doing the planning on the ground, what will the scale of disruption be here in Kent if there is no deal, or if there is any deal?
Really, it depends on that quantity, as you say, on what level that deal is, what the impact is on the port. But in 2015, the M20 was used for Operation Stack, and it caused chaos because that road was totally blocked. So what Department for Transport are looking at is other alternatives now. So Manston at the moment isn't used for anything, so it's an ideal place for holding areas. What we've got to look at is the timing to make sure that freight can get to the Port of Dover, and that's what we've been monitoring today. The release rate, how many trucks could be on that bit of road without actually causing issues to the rest of Thanet and the surrounding area.
John Davies, aren't people worrying about the deal? Aren't they all sort of scaremongering, doom-mongering, as Boris Johnson, the former Foreign Secretary, suggested today? I mean, he said no deal is actually closest to what most people voted for, particularly in this part of Kent, actually.
I think if that's actually exactly what he said, I'd have to agree with that, because at the end of the day, although a deal and with the safeguards would be very important, as I think was being discussed earlier, the Northern Irish MPs are not particularly concerned about this backstop issue, and the backstop seems to be the main stumbling block in getting a deal. In the event of no solution to that, then ultimately, as we head towards the Brexit deadline date, that leaves us with one alternative, and that is no deal.
Peter Campbell, I mean, actually, in this part of Kent, you've got many UKIP councillors sharing the council with you.
True.
Strongly pro-Brexit. No deal is actually perfectly fine for them.
Well, I'm more concerned with the impact it's going to have on Ramsgate. And if there's going to be ferries in Ramsgate, the lorries that are going to have to come through Ramsgate town is going to cause enormous environmental impact on my residents here in Ramsgate that they do not want and they do not deserve. So,
have you got a plan for that, diverting the lorries out of Ramsgate town centre?
Yes, because they won't be using Ramsgate town centre, they will be using the tunnel and then onto the Thanet Way, so that does not take the traffic through the town centre.
Unless the tunnel's closed, and then they have to come down through the town centre, past a tiny little roundabout at the bottom there, and through the Cafe Society that we've taken many years to build up in Ramsgate itself.
John Davies, shouldn't you be embracing the dam busters spirit and seeing the upside for Ramsgate? Extra business, the port open once again.
In this community, you're probably better off calling it the Dunkirk spirit as much as the dam busters spirit.
Very true.
However, whilst that is very much our attitude, there's a lot of questions that don't add up when it comes to the time frame available to bring these ferries in, whether those vessels exist. We have been campaigning for a prolonged period of time for due diligence to be done on the company concerned, because we still do not believe
this is seaborne freight you're talking about. I mean, the government says it has done due diligence on that, and that the dredging will be done within weeks, by March the 29th, certainly.
We would, as a community, I think it's fair to say, we would welcome any initiative that was viable and sustainable and put an end to the massive losses that we have been subsidising on that port. The questions remain as to whether this is a feasible and viable situation. In addition to that, the number of vessels and movements that are being discussed do not necessarily make the Port of Ramsgate viable again, which means that this community will then continue to subsidise the situation.
This is enormously environmentally unfriendly. This town is not built to have this amount of lorries coming through. There were talk of 3,600 lorries a day. Absolutely ridiculous. The tailbacks will be down the M2 all the way to Ashford, if that's the case.
Well, let me ask Toby how to respond to that.
Again, by using the roads that are there, the network of roads that are there, the Thanet Way was designed to suit Thanet to get through to the port. The tunnel was built for that. So as I say, it would be only on very, very minor occasions, if that tunnel happened to be closed for an incident, that traffic would have to come through. But the vast majority of time, that traffic will use the roads that it's designed to use.
Well, just briefly, you talked about an incident there. What is the fear, if there is an emergency, the impact of no deal, briefly?
On the tunnel, on Ramsgate Tunnel, there wouldn't be any impact due to no deal, etc.
Gridlock is the word he's looking for.
But no, I mean, that would not affect this corner. What is being planned is to make sure traffic can keep flowing and that Kent can be as minimally affected.
Gentlemen, I'm really sorry. I'm sure the argument will continue in the pub over the road, but thanks very much for that.